Hello, and welcome to the inaugural Who Knows Vodcast. Now, I'm calling it a vodcast because, well, it's video, innit? And, well, it's a cast. Apologies for the scruffiness, but we are in the middle of the coronavirus outbreak, and, well, to be honest, I couldn't be arsed, you know? Anyway, let's start with some background. I am a long time fan of Doctor Who. I started watching the show way back in the mid-70s. I mean, I can even narrow that down to October 1977, because it turns out the first story that I ever watched was The Invisible Enemy, which was back in the Tom Baker era. Incidentally, first story to ever... to introduce K9. Now, during my childhood, I almost literally, figuratively at least, devoured the Target novelizations. Mostly borrowed from Mirfield Library, and I watched all the episodes, saw all the regenerations, and yeah, 89, absolutely gutted when I found out that Michael Grade had destroyed my favourite TV show purely because he didn't like it. So, how did one man destroy it? Well, Michael Grade was the Director General of the BBC in the late 1980s and early 90s. And unlike his uncle, Lou Grade, who pretty much bankrolled Gerry Anderson's entire career, he hated science fiction. It was Michael Grade who had Doctor Who moved away from its traditional Saturday tea time slot to Monday and Tuesday nights, concurrently. Monday night, then finishing on Tuesday night, opposite Coronation Street. Now, for those of you who are outside the UK, Coronation Street, certainly back in the late 80s, was a ratings juggernaut. It would regularly get 30, 40 million people watching it. And you put that up, you put Doctor Who up against it, and it's getting absolutely slaughtered. Add to that, you had minuscule budgets. I mean, something I recently found out was that Red Dwarf, which was also on around the same sort of time, one episode of Red Dwarf had the same budget as an entire series of Doctor Who. Mostly because Red Dwarf was on a light entertainment budget, whereas Doctor Who was on a drama budget. Now, what we also didn't know is, at the time anyway, they brought in new writers who really, beyond Pip and Jane Baker, really didn't have much of a clue about writing science fiction. And John Nathan Turner really, he'd had enough. He'd done a good few years as executive producer and he just wanted out. And despite a late rally when Andrew Cartmel took over as script editor, that's the nearest analogue you had back then to the current idea of showrunner. They took over, rallied it. In fact, the ratings were starting to rise again. It got up to about 3.6, heading towards 4 million, when the axe fell. And Doctor Who died officially on the 6th of December 1989 with the final episode of a story that was ironically entitled Survival. And for most TV series, that would have been it. Thing is, Doctor Who had and still has a very passionate fan base who would just not let it die. We bought the videos of the old stories. First one I ever bought was Silver Nemesis, and from there I bought loads of them. One of my proudest achievements at the time was managing to track down the entire Key to Time on video, and that took a lot of doing. When Virgin got the rights to publish new stories, we bought the New Adventures. We bought the Missing Adventures, which was a second range that they brought out to do stories of the old Doctors. Then in 1996, with the help of, was it Fox? I think it was Fox. A new TV pilot for Doctor Who was made. Alan Yentob, who by that time was the new Director General of the BBC, said that if it gets 10 million viewers, he would fund the new series. Unfortunately, it only got, was it about 8.4 or 9 million, up to, well, less than 9 million, so it didn't do it. And the fact that it kind of tanked in America didn't help its chances. But then again, it is worth noting that it was on opposite Roseanne, which in fact, it was the final episode of Roseanne, I seem to think, of the original run before Roseanne Barr came back and absolutely destroyed the series, and all the fond memories anybody had of that series completely, with her various rants on Twitter. Anyway, what that did prove was that Doctor Who wasn't anywhere near dead. 3 years later, 1999, a bunch of fans who had formed a company called Big Finish took up the baton and have continued to run with it even now, like 20 years later. And they have gone on to produce some of the best Who stories in literally any medium. Chimes of Midnight, for instance, which is scary as hell. Don't listen to that one in the dark. But that is not what we're here to talk about. What we are here to talk about in this show is the recent Doctor Who novel, At Childhood's End. Now, if you're in the UK, you might have seen a trailer for this one after a recent episode of Doctor Who. For anybody who hasn't, it featured Sophie Aldred playing Dorothy McShane on TV for the first time in, 30 years? Bit more, maybe? Note, I'm saying for the first time in 30 years on TV. Because she's been playing Ace consistently for 20 of those 30 years for Big Finish. So it's pretty fair to know that, it's pretty fair to say that she does know the character really well by now. Anyway, the trailer shows Ace wearing a suit looking out over London. She then heads for the door of her flat, looking very determined, and the camera lingers on a coat hook by the side of the door, which has got her old puffer jacket on it, the one with Ace written on the back. And that is actually a staged version of a scene that's in the book. Well, that was the trailer. What about the book? Now, the book starts oh dear. The book starts with Dorothy McShane, the head of A Charitable Earth, which was referenced in the Sarah Jane Adventures TV series, if you remember that, having vivid nightmares about being trapped in a hostile alien landscape and when she woke up, through just sort of flicking through TV channels late at night, she found out that disaffected kids, like she had been 35 years before, are vanishing under shockingly similar circumstances. Next day, literally, she gets wind of an alien object appearing in orbit around the Earth. And so Dorothy decides to get together with an ex-boyfriend of hers, who has gone on to become the director of British Space Defence, and uses some alien technology she's gathered over the years to get to the object and investigate before anybody else does, especially the Americans, Russians, Chinese, and so on. And that's where she runs into the Doctor. But this is not the Doctor she remembers. Now from there, we get some tense moments where we find out exactly why Ace decided to go home and leave the TARDIS, and how she was, well, damaged by the way in which the Doctor and she parted company. We also find out how much the Doctor's changed since those days, and how the new companions deal with meeting up with one of the old ones. Now, one doesn't deal with it well at all. Another is in awe of their predecessor, and the third acts as kind of a steady influence. I mean, that's the three of them. You've got Graham, Yaz, and Ryan. Well, you want to find out which one's which? Read the book. Now, okay, it's not a new set of themes, since they were partially explored in the David Tennant era episode School Reunion. But, well, just thinking about this, how much more explosive, literally, Nitro 9, yeah, would it have been if Rose had met Ace instead of Sarah Jane? Ooh, sparks would have flown. Especially if Ace had been using the baseball bat. Fortunately, Sarah Jane, much more level-headed. But, you know, conjecture for another time. So where have we got to? Yeah. Ace and Doctor, Yaz, Graham, Ryan meet up aboard an alien object in orbit around the Earth. And then it all goes to hell in a handbasket, as the sworn enemies of the builders of the alien object show up and target Ace, the Doctor and her crew as collaborators with their enemies, messing up the attempt to find and rescue these snatched kids. So in other words, it's another Tuesday afternoon for the Doctor and the crew, innit? And, well, you know there's a happy ending coming up because it's a Doctor Who book. And yeah, that's what you get. But you also get the added bonus of some reconciliation for Dorothy, who goes back to calling herself Ace after spending some time with this new incarnation of the Doctor and sort of, well, repairing some of the damage. And there's also a nice bit of backstory covering how she actually ended up on Iceworld. Now, at the end of it, what you've got in this story is answers to the question, what happened to Ace? Now, it also shows us the damage the Seventh Doctor's scheming had on the person who was, at the time, really his closest friend. And, okay, I've seen a few YouTube videos banging on about, no, it's ruining it because it's... The Doctor isn't like that. The Doctor doesn't do that. The Seventh Doctor did. The Seventh Doctor, especially if you look at the last season, he was a complete bastard to Ace. I mean, look at Ghostlight. Look at The Curse of Fenric. Look at Survival itself. He was putting her through the ringer. And, you know, that was his best friend we're talking about. This was a character who quite happily put his friends in mortal danger, you know, manoeuvring them as chess pieces against the likes of Fenric, Davros, Cybermen, and so on. He was not a pleasant character. Okay, he did try and make amends, and you see that sort of thing happening in the Big Finish things as well, where he does kind of put his friends in harm's way, but then he kind of tries to make amends and apologise his way out of it. But obviously what happens in this story is that Ace has had enough of that, and she just basically says, well, screw you, I'm off. And that's where they left it until they meet up again 30 years later, and what, 6 regenerations later? But yeah, this story does put quite a nice end cap on it, and also leaves things open for Ace to reappear, which is good. That is something I would definitely like to see. I will admit there was a little bit of a sour note there, because it kind of brushes the New Adventures away by saying this happened in an alternate timeline, which Ace does actually get to have a look into in one of the flashback sequences. But you can't please all of us, can you? And really, it was all about seeing Ace back in action. And we get plenty of that. That was the major draw for me, and I got what I wanted, which is great. And, I enjoyed it. It was a good read. Now, incidentally, Big Finish, as part of their main range, they brought out a story called Dark Universe, which also brought back Ace 20 years later, after she left the TARDIS. But we'll save that one for a future cast, since I've just noticed I'm pushing 17 minutes, and I was going to try and make this one short. Right, so catch you later. And remember, who knows?